Lucky Land Casino, asking people, what's the weirdest place you've gotten lucky?
Lucky? In line at the deli, I guess?
Aha, in my dentist's office. More than once, actually.
Do I have to say?
Yes, you do.
In the car before my kids' PTA meeting.
Really?
Yes.
Excuse me, what's the weirdest place you've gotten lucky?
I never win and tell.
Well, there you have it. You can get lucky anywhere, playing at LuckyLandSlots.com. Play for free right now. Are you feeling lucky? No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18 plus. Terms and conditions apply. See website for details.
I'm Jason Alexander.
And I'm Peter Tobin.
And we know you've been pining for a brand new podcast hosted by a beloved television icon.
And a largely unknown talk radio host.
Yeah. I wrote that. Pine no more, because we're the hosts of Really No Really, the funny, informative show that seeks the answers to things that make us say, No, really?
You'll laugh, you'll learn.
And we'll get paid. That's Really No Really with Jason Alexander and Peter Tilden on the iHeartRadio app, on Apple Podcasts, or where you get your podcasts.
And anybody who uses the word pining, let me know, because I don't think anybody's used that since the Middle Ages.
Very common word.
Fans of the hit TV show Scandal can now revisit every episode on Unpacking the Toolbox, a Scandal Rewatch podcast, hosted by the cast members behind Quinn Perkins and Huck. So, gladiators, grab some Gettysburger and relive Scandal's most iconic OMG moments.
We would be in like 110 degrees in a wool coat.
Yep.
I mean, the chafing that was going on in my pencil skirts, I deserve all the acting awards, people.
Listen to Unpacking the Toolbox, a Scandal Rewatch podcast on the iHeartRadio app or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is the Jabberjaw Podcast Network.
Hey, before we dive into this week's episode, I want to tell you about the new book of poetry by Mike Posner called Teardrops and Balloons. So, you may know him as a total washed-up pop star with a couple of songs that you frankly don't even like. But this book will come as a shock to you. I've read pieces of it, and it's unbelievable. He takes on the topics of fame, God, masturbation, horses, death, dating, Bruno Mars, plane crashes, and chewing gum. Basically, no stone is left unturned. It's available March 17th at Amazon and also MikePosner.com. Trust me, this is a really, really fun read from a person that you would be like, oh, why is he going to be interesting? Why is this book going to be interesting? Trust me, it is. So dive into it and enjoy. Hello, everybody, and you're listening to 100 Words or Less, the podcast. I'm your host, Ray Arkins. Thank you for joining me this week to listen to some insightful discussions about independent music and the people that are involved in it. This week is definitely no exception to the rule. Well, how about I just give you an exception to the rule? How about I just interview a random person that doesn't even know what punk or hardcore is? I wonder how that would turn out. Actually, it'd probably be pretty terrible because, we would just talk for 5 minutes and then that show would be over. But that is not the case. We are talking to Tom May from the Menzingers, and he is in an incredible band. I mean, the Menzingers are a band that it makes me so happy that they are growing in popularity and becoming more and more successful because they've just been at it for quite some time, and that's what a touring band does. It's over time, they're just, get progressively better musically and get progressively better from a live show perspective, and that's exactly where they're at right now. And they released a record that came out this I think last month called After the Party. I was almost going to say a title of their older records because their older records are just as good, but this record, holy, it is unbelievable. And so normally I don't try to be as topical on the fact that record came out, I want to release the interview with said person around the same time the record comes out. I just typically don't like those sort of record cycle tropes because if I'm talking to a person and they've done a million other interviews, they have already answered a ton of questions about themselves and everything else. So I try to get people at the off times, but this one I had to make an exception to the rule. So yeah, you should listen to their new record. And this is what's going to happen. You're going to hear Tom speak about his life in and around music. And we went to some really, really fun and interesting places. And it was a really good hang. But let's get some business pleasantries out of the way, and then we'll dive into the interview. Please, I mentioned this last week, but it would be extremely meaningful for me if you did these two things. So one, if you are listening on Overcast, which is a podcast catcher / player, please give this episode a star or give all the episodes stars, because the more and more that happens, the more and more likelihood that this show will be featured in their music section. And frankly, every time I look at that music section, I'm like, oh man, that show's terrible. Oh, that shouldn't be in there. It's like, well, what does this have to do with music? So please, if you're listening to it on Overcast, it's basically, like I said, just another way for you to listen to podcasts if you are interested in like having a more robust experience. So, have more capabilities in regards to listening to the shows at a faster speed and all that sort of stuff. But anyways, I'm not trying to sell that product because, well, frankly, it's free. But anyways, I just would like you to do that. If you listen to it on Overcast, just give it a star. And the second thing I'm going to have you do is take a audience survey. So this, you hear advertisers on the show occasionally, and this is an incredibly important piece of the process because, if this show is making me even a little bit of money, it is worth it from a advertiser's perspective to be able to be like, hey, I want to reach the audience that listens to that particular show. And frankly, anytime anybody gives me money to advertise their product, this is a win. This is a win for podcasting. This is a win for independent music in general because, they're supporting this thing. They're being able to give me the time and the space in order for me to conduct the business that I do. So please, if you would go to podsurvey.com/words, WORDS. I can never spell words easily. WORDS. Anyways, podsurvey.com/words. There's like 15, 20 questions. It'll take less than 5 minutes of your time, and you'll be entered to a contest to win a $100 Amazon gift card. I think it's $100. Yeah, I think it is. But please do that because it's super, super valuable. And I know shows like mine in the past have asked this sort of stuff, but this is a new survey. So please go do that, and I will love you forever. Or, well, I already do because you're listening to the show. But yeah, if you do that, it just helps everything out. So please do that. Anyways, let's just dive in the conversation with Tom, right? I've already told you everything I need to. So here is my discussion with Tom, and I will speak to you after the episode is over, as I usually do. And for those of you that don't stick around for that, you always miss the tease. Well, not the tease. I just basically announce usually who the next week's guest is. So stick around. You might hear some pertinent and interesting information there. So there you go. And here is Tom. I mean, I've been aware of the band and a fan of the band, since you started putting out records on, Red Scare. That's where I kind of, first heard of you guys.
Oh, awesome.
But it was one of those things where you guys always kind of fell into, the category of like, yeah, I like you guys, but it wasn't, if someone pressed me, it wasn't one of those things where I'm like, oh, dude, I'm a total diehard. Like, dude, I'm a total Zinger head. I just made that up.
Yes. I don't think I'm going to take that from you, but maybe we'll see if it sticks.
I hope not. That's terrible. I'm sorry. but the new record hit me in ways that I was just like, yo, like I feel like it's the culmination of everything you guys have been doing, and I know a lot of people are saying that about this record, and I'm sure you guys have felt a lot of the praise from that perspective. From your guys' perspective, is it just awesome to be able to be like, yo, we've been a band for 10 plus years, and like people can still catch up to us and be like, hey, this record is unbelievable, and like this far in, really you should be on cruise control, like you should be really.
Yeah, totally. It's been pretty weird. We were really apprehensive, I guess. Not apprehensive, that's definitely not the right word. We were a little bit nervous. We're like, okay, we have been around for this long. We don't want to do the same exact thing over and over again. We've seen so many bands, and some of them are really, great friends of ours and great bands that have something that they stick with and kind of just hammer it out each time. And it seems like it becomes like labored, and we'd rather just, kind of just keep having fun with it and listening to weird stuff and pushing it that way. But yeah, but being around for 10 years is kind of, it's like, what do you do? Where do you go? Like, how can you actually keep people excited?
Yeah, totally.
And it seems like it's working. So well,
and also the idea that, like I said, I think this record will get you people who, might have been like myself, where they're just like, oh yeah, they're sitting on the fence and they like you guys, but they're not like devotees, or than the people who are just like, oh yeah, I heard this new Menzingers record, and I didn't know they had like 3 full lengths before that and a bunch of EPs and all that other stuff.
Yeah, totally. And it's funny, on the other side of the fence, you get a lot of people that are like, man, fuck them. They, this record's so polished. And my favorite record is the one that came out, when they were 19, and I can't relate to anything that they said anymore. Right. But this has been the album that has had the least amount of pushback regarding that, at least on social media. So
right. No, that's amazing. Yeah, it just feels gratifying. I presume that's the emotion that you're probably feeling.
Yeah, that's definitely would be, if I pick one, it's definitely gratifying.
That's awesome. And so were you yourself born and raised in Scranton, or was it kind of the suburbs of that area, or where did you come up?
So I was born actually in Philadelphia and lived here for the first couple of years of my life. And then my family moved. Both my parents are from Scranton, so they moved back to Scranton. I was raised in Scranton. And that, me personally, then I moved back down here, I think 8 years ago, maybe 9 years ago now. Damn, yeah, I've been here for a while.
Right. And I presume that the connection that you had with Philly wasn't so deep when you moved from Scranton, from Philly to Scranton. Just, I'm sure you didn't have that many impressions of the city at that particular time, did you?
No, not even close. I mean, I was like 4 or 5, so I don't really remember anything.
Right.
I think I claim that I can remember the carpet in one of the houses. Specifically, I just have this like really weird old memory, but that could just be a total, misfiring neuron somewhere that made that up. But yeah, so I didn't really have a connection there, except for the fact that everybody really liked the sports teams in my family. So it was like kind of like Philly was the place. It's like 2.5 hours south. But it was like the closest accessible city that we had relatives and friends in and stuff. So like large city. I mean.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I mean, and most people in this day and age always look at Scranton and are like, "Oh yeah, that's the town on The Office." And I'm sure the amount of jokes that kind of come from that are really really funny to you guys at this point. But
it was funny because when we first started a tour, people would mention that it was like when the show first started to gain popularity, and out of some kind of adolescent punk principle, I was like, "I'm not watching that fucking show. It's bullshit. Everybody just makes Office jokes." And then I watched the show and realized how funny and how great it is. So it was kind of it's a good thing that the really popular show from the city is actually a funny show, right. A great show. So it's definitely a positive.
No, that's a good point, because there's I like, as a teenager, how you make these really principled stances just based on the fact that, oh dude, it's popular. There's no way I'm going to be fucking into it. And then,
exactly.
And then,
so simple.
Totally. And then 5-6 years later, you're like secretly watching it and you're like, God, I was wrong.
Yeah. Just, if there was one thing, there's that whole thing, if you can go back in time and tell yourself something. Everybody's like, yeah, I'd go back and tell myself to work harder and all that stuff. I'd definitely go back and tell myself to just stop being an asshole about everything. Missed out so many bands, so many all kinds of things, just from that whole principle of that's popular, I can't like it.
Right, just the
reaction.
Totally. The pushback on mainstream culture, like, oh, that's not for me. It's like, well, yeah, maybe it kind of is.
Yeah, there's a reason that it's really popular. Maybe it's
right. Okay. And so, what was your family structure like growing up? Like brothers and sisters, mom and dad in the house. How did it look?
Oh, yeah. So I had mom and dad in the house. I had 2 sisters and a brother, so it was a full house all the time. And everybody had a friend over all the time. So, it was like just very, very chaotic, very, very big thing. I think that was a big benefit socially, because you just kind of you didn't really have that much alone time. You just kind of had to be around people all the time. Right. So, yeah, it was like that. And I have a big extended family. My parents, on my mom's side, there are 6 kids, and on my dad's side there was 8. So I have I think 30 cousins on one side and then like 17 on another side. So it's just huge family, just all over the place all the time in Scranton.
Yeah, that's it does sound like a very revolving door-esque of everything that's happening in the house.
Oh yeah, and that was the worst. I had cousins that there's a bunch of female cousins on my dad's side. They'd kill me if they heard this, but they are all kind of close to the same age, and I would fuck their names up all the time. Still fuck them up once in a while. Like, yeah, I've known you my entire life. Yeah, say the wrong name. It's the worst.
Yeah, well, it's like they're, if they're, like you said, similar in age, like I could see where you would be like, oh yeah, there's Gina and Tina. It's like, oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, and they all kind of look a little bit the same. They have like the same sibling features.
Right. You're like, which one are you?
Yeah, which one are you?
And so, what kind of kid? Seeing that where you landed on the spectrum of your siblings, what kind of kid did you find yourself being? Were you the stereotypical, like, middle child that was kind of like, receiving some benefit of the doubt because your older siblings had already, acted out and received some punishment, or were you kind of experimenting yourself?
I was the oldest, man. I had the brunt of everything.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, younger. I'm sorry, I didn't put you. Yeah. Okay, so yeah.
No, that's it. Yeah, I didn't tell you.
You were
I was the oldest.
You were the front line. You were the one that experienced everything first.
Yeah, I experienced everything first. I also definitely. Well, I mean, not probably. I acted out the most by far out of all of them. But they got caught a lot more. They just weren't good. My brother and sister got caught drinking so many times in high school. I never got caught once. But definitely kind of paved the way for. I think that I wasn't allowed to have co-ed sleepovers, ever until I was an adult. When I was like, in a relationship with someone. But that was like their whole thing. All those, I just kind of definitely pushed the limits for all of them, and was kind of a total asshole.
Right.
So. Right. By the time they got to my younger sister, who's 7 years younger than me, I think they had given up for sure.
Their resistance was worn down.
Yeah, they were just done. They were like, "Oh, you want to do this? Fine. See ya in a couple days."
Totally. Just let us know if something seriously goes wrong.
Yeah, exactly. They probably had cell phones. Yeah, had a cell phone by then anyway. All that.
Right. Yeah, they were safe. They had no way to get in a hold of you if you were out of the house.
No, we would. I would call. We did that thing from remember the immense barrage of collect call company commercials that would come out.
Of course.
Yeah, and there's one, I guess it wasn't for like 1010 220 or whatever, but it was like hey, it's Bob, we had a baby, eats boy. And you just like say that message so that when you receive the collect call, they'd get the message without having to pay for the call.
Right.
We used to do that. I remember when we would go downtown. There was a bus stop right in front of my house. We used to take the bus, me and my friends, to downtown Scranton to the mall and stuff, and if we needed to, check in or something, we'd go and make one of those collect calls and do that when it works.
That's amazing. I never heard of that relay message. You're like, I don't have a quarter. I don't have 35 cents to pay for this.
I don't have 35 cents. Yeah.
Right. I'm gonna hang out at the mall for like 5 hours, and I'm not gonna spend a dime.
Nope, and call my sister and just say something really fast on an automated thing.
Yeah, that's perfect. So, I mean, like you mentioned, you were, a self-proclaimed asshole. How is that manifesting itself? Was it one of those things like once you started to enter high school and started to develop your own identity, that's when you were, misbehaving, so to speak?
Yeah, totally. So I was in the top of the class kind of things when I was younger in middle school. Elementary school, I went to like a separate. We had this thing called a gifted program, and did that, and did like a bunch of those different academically focused things. And then in high school, it just something clicked, man. I don't know if it was angst or just too many hormones at one time. I could maybe just punk rock, who knows? But definitely kind of just turned into hating everything. And I do also gotta say, I was so mean to my siblings sometimes. I think back and look at it, and I'm like, why the fuck did I say that or do that? It's the worst. There's a funny.
Can you give me? Yeah, I was about to say, can you give me a specific example? Because I mean, usually those things are, they maybe live on in your head, and then your siblings were like, "Oh, I didn't remember that," or vice versa, where they're like, "Oh, I didn't even think that was a thing," and then they're like, "Oh yeah, you told me that those green shoes I wore were awful, and I can't wear green shoes to this day," or whatever.
Oh, that happens all the time. Somebody will be like, "You said that," and I'll be like, "Fuck, did I really say that to you?" It's like I may have said it in passing, but it's such a hurtful thing that stuck with you for 20 years. Like, Jesus Christ. There was some. I remember the first time that Eric, our bass player, we played at a ska band together in high school. The first time they ever came over to my house, I answered the door with no shirt on and like bloody scratches across my chest because my sister and I got in a fight. And I don't know if they had sisters, but they had like different way of fighting. They would be like me and my brother, we could like roll around on the ground and punch each other or whatever. But the sisters would be a little bit more diabolical. At least my sisters were a little bit more diabolical in the way that they went about getting revenge. My sister, we got in a fight over, I don't know, maybe I probably picked up the phone while she was on the internet. Remember that? So if you got in a big fight, you'd run over and pick up the extra line and would kick them off online, and then all hell would.
You get kicked out of the chat room.
Right. Yeah, you get kicked out of the chat room or whatever, Backstreet Boys chat room bullshit or whatever.
Right.
But yeah, we got in a fight or something like that, and she's like, all right, well, whatever. And then she just like ran into my room. I was like, what the fuck is she doing in my room? And I went in, she was standing on the other side of the room holding my first electric guitar, and then she just threw it across the room. So yeah, we started chasing around the house, and then she got the nails out and was like going crazy. And yeah, that was the first time he came over my house. So I think he thought that I've lived in some kind of insane, like unsafe domestic environment or something like that, which I didn't. Yeah,
totally. It's like, hey, why are you bleeding? Like, what's really happening here?
Yeah, why are you sweating and bleeding? What could you possibly have been doing?
Yeah, it's a casual Thursday afternoon.
Yeah, just like 6:30 on a Thursday. That's
no big deal. What were your parents doing for work?
My dad is an engineer. And my mom is a teacher. So she was a school teacher in Philadelphia, where my dad worked for a chemical company. He's a chemical engineer. They sold I think liquid helium and liquid nitrogen and stuff, somewhere around here in one of the chemical yards.
Sure.
And then moved to Scranton, and he worked for a couple different engineering firms. And then he actually ended up spending most of my childhood working for a company called WIA Manufacturing, which manufactured a bulk of the compact discs when they came out.
Oh yeah, I remember. Yeah, I definitely remember working because I worked at record labels for a long time, and so you'd obviously source out manufacturing. But I definitely remember.
Replication.
Right, and. Yeah. I remember too. I think in that part of the country there was those CD manufacturing plants had to worry about like leaks. As far as like employees stealing CDs and whatever the new R. Kelly comes out and someone lifts the CD or whatever. I mean, maybe not specifically your dad's plant or whatever, but I know that was an issue at that time.
Yeah, I'm sure. I don't remember that specifically. I do remember one thing that we got, which is cool. When DVDs came out. It was before the internet, so I guess the journalism coverage was slow, and less efficient then. But all of the managers and engineers of the work they got like a DVD player that they would loan all the employees. So the employees would get to bring it home and play a DVD and we were like, what the fuck? A movie on a CD is just wacky as fuck. But they would bring it and to each place. So we brought it to my parents' house, and then, all those people, we had the entire neighborhood over to watch, I think, Space Jam. And it was like Space Jam. I think it was on a DVD before it was in theaters, maybe. But yeah, it was really interesting to see that technology really, quickly and up close. Funny thing, though, my dad was, he worked in the mastering department, but from a completely technical and managerial aspect, because he doesn't know anything about, mastering or any of the engineering involved or any of the having to listen to it, but it was kind of funny. And he had a couple of funny stories where he would eventually have to get on the phone with artists that were complaining about the record, and one of them was Van Halen, was like screaming about the record not sounding right, but his argument was that everything sounded right except for his Sony Discman. He was like, yeah, but when I put it in my Discman, it doesn't sound good. And they were like, oh my god, you change your headphones or something, man, like what?
Right. You're like, this is like, I mean, I appreciate the fact that the artist is going so far to speak to the person at the manufacturing plant, but
yeah,
let's be real about this. Like, you're complaining about something that most people would be like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, that was very funny. I remember he was like real stressed about it because he didn't get it. He was like, I don't know what we're gonna do. We can't. Here we are. Yeah,
I gotta tell Van Halen he's wrong.
Yeah, I gotta tell this guy he's wrong. Yeah.
That's amazing. And so from that perspective, I'm sure that once you started to devote your life to music, your parents were just like, whoa, Tom, like, I don't know about this at all.
Oh yeah, this didn't resolve until a couple of years ago after everybody was like, oh yeah, I guess you have been making a living doing it for a couple of years, so it's working. Right. I mean, I gotta give some more credit. They were supportive to an extent, but when it first started when it first started to cut into school or plans for college and things like that, it was definitely annoying, I'll say, conversations constantly where it was kind of like a push to, well, you're going to get this kind of job or that kind of job. And
Right. Well, because both of your parents' professions are very practical. You know, it's like these are things that you go to school for, you get a degree for, and then you're set off on a path, as opposed to
absolutely,
as opposed to this unwieldy thing that you were trying to do.
Totally, where there's no blueprint really that you can. It's kind of just like fending for ourselves to take control of it.
Right.
And especially, another thing is my dad grew up he did not grow up wealthy. So he's like a very self-made man. And, you know, he's really into the fact, and he really did make himself. You know, he like put himself through college, got an engineering degree. You know, built a family, all that. So it's like, the idea of not being like, hey, I worked so hard to put you in fucking college, and you're not in it. You know, like it's understandably pissed about that in retrospect.
Leftovers or the DMV or house cleaning or Chumba Casino always brings the fun. Play over 100 different games online for free from anywhere. You could redeem some serious prizes. ChumbaCasino.com. Live the Chumba life. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+ terms and conditions apply. See website for details.
I'm Lance Bass, and you may know me from a little band called NSYNC. What you may not know is that when I was 23, I traveled to Moscow to train to become the youngest person to go to space. And when I was there, as you can imagine, I heard some pretty wild stories. But there was this one that really stuck with me. About a Soviet astronaut who found himself stuck in space with no country to bring him down. It's 1991, and that man, Sergei Krikalev, is floating in orbit when he gets a message that down on Earth, his beloved country, the Soviet Union, is falling apart. And now he's left defending the Union's last outpost. This is the crazy story of the 313 days he spent in space. 313 days that changed the world. Listen to The Last Soviet on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
During the summer of 2020, some Americans suspected that the FBI had secretly infiltrated the racial justice demonstrations. And you know what? They were right. I'm Trevor Aronson, and I'm hosting a new podcast series, Alphabet Boys.
As the FBI, sometimes you gotta grab the little guy to go after the big guy.
Each season will take you inside an undercover investigation. In the first season of Alphabet Boys, we're revealing how the FBI spied on protesters in Denver. At the center of this story is a raspy-voiced, cigar-smoking man who drives a silver hearse.
And inside this hearse was like a lot of guns.
He's a shark, and not in the good badass way. He's a nasty shark.
He was just waiting for me to set the date, the time, and then for sure he was trying to get it to happen.
Listen to Alphabet Boys on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Sure. So did you, the like you mentioned, the ska band that you played in, that was the Bob and the Saggets, correct?
Yeah, we were called Bob and the Saggets. We played in like Connecticut and New York and down by Philadelphia. Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
I just love the fact that I'm from Southern California, and that was the hotbed of ska, and every best ska name you could possibly imagine existed in Southern California. So I always get excited when I hear other pockets of the country had band names that were equally as awesome as the whatever, whether it's like Mephistopheles or Bob and the Saggets is perfect. Like there's no way that you can name your band like that and not be a ska band.
That's totally true. That's totally true. Oh man.
But
yeah, those were funny days. We just smoked lots and lots of weed and played reggae. If we didn't smoke so much weed, we wouldn't have been a ska band. That's what probably is true.
The main influence.
Yeah, that was the main influence. Was like this. If we could have got drunk, we probably we would have been like an oi band or something. Right. But you can't buy beer when you're not 21, but you can buy tons of weed. So right. Those are really fun times.
Were your what kind of kid did you find yourself being like in high school? I'm guessing that's when independent music started to show itself to you, and you started to discover more bands. Like, what was your just because you're the oldest sibling, what was your entry point to that sort of stuff?
Yeah, I guess I started listening to whatever aggressive music was on the radio. I remember really liking Korn, which was really popular at the time. And some of the new metal was starting to come out. So that was like really, made me really excited. And then somebody gave a friend of mine a copy of Out Come the Wolves by Rancid. And it was like a kind of an eye-opening thing. Oh, well, actually, sorry, I just skipped over Green Day and Blink-182. That was all on the radio. And then I was like, oh, this is punk. This is cool. You'd see their videos on MTV at nighttime, and you just like sit there and wait to see it. Or somebody would order like a collection of Green Day videos from the record store, and we'd all sit around and watch it. And that was definitely started to influence it. And I remember I got a job as a dishwasher when I was 14, and one of the people who worked there, she was like an old punk lady, and she gave me a copy of Plastic Surgery Disasters by the Dead Kennedys. So that was kind of like there's a whole subculture of this stuff that we didn't, wasn't exposed to it before. And that was kind of the jumping point.
That's amazing. I always love those anecdotal stories of a person that is, such a transactional period of most people's lives, whether it's like, if someone you work with at a, video store or whatever, just like hands you something that's just like, oh yeah, like, they probably thought about it for 2 seconds. And then this was like, set your life off in a whole different path.
Oh, totally. Yeah, she probably just saw it in the door of her car and was like, "Oh, that kid's working on it. Here, check this out." It's so fleeting, but such a important and pivotal point.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow.
Especially when you're that. I also like the context. I'm really glad that you mentioned such a wide array of artists, because I do think there's something that's so charming about that time of you getting into music, because you don't have a context for anything. You're not like. What we were joking about earlier in regards to like, oh, if it's mainstream, it sucks, I can't listen to it. Like, you're just listening to everything, and you have no idea that this band is like, part of the San Francisco punk scene, or this band came from, Bakersfield, California. You don't know. You're just like, music's rad.
Oh, totally. Nothing's pigeonholed. Everything's still pure. It's like, and I think once in a while I'll run into people at our shows and stuff that I think still live that way as an adult somehow. They just don't give a, they're not into the identifying themselves by the specific subgenre of the music they listen to. It's like it's really kind of a beautiful thing. And I think it's really, especially at that age, it's really important, to just kind of, not important, but it is, like you said, it's really interesting and wonderful that kind of exists at that time. I mean, kind of wish I could get that back.
Right. Totally. And it is, I find it interesting too, just because that time is also you have nothing but time. So the sort of research that you put into it yields so many interesting results, where it's like, you may, get into like third or fourth rate copies of a band, and you're like just as into them as the quote unquote original of it. And you're just like, dude, I got to get more stuff that sounds exactly like this.
Oh yeah, for me that was Operation Ivy. I mean, that record came out in like 1989. I was 3 years old.
Right.
But when I got hands on it, because we used to order from Lookout. They used to have a paper catalog that somebody got in South Scranton. I remember one of those kids had it, and we all like pitched in money and ordered shit. And I remember getting Operation Ivy, and that was the perfect time, because right at that age, your mind's starting to expand a little bit. And I started to realize, like, there's all these political things going on. It doesn't seem fair the way a lot of people in the world are being treated. And Operation Ivy put it into a simple context enough for me. So it was like, holy shit. Not only is this great music, but this is like religious. This is like something, a good placement morally in the world. It's kind of like the kicker that happened with them. And I think that really, and it was so old, but at the time it was so relevant to me. I needed to find everything like it.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I like that idea where a band needs to be, digestible enough for a younger brain to wrap their head around something that, these issues that we deal with, politically, socially, have so many gray areas. But a lot of the times when you're that young, you need to have it packaged up like, propaganda is a perfect vehicle for being like, hey, eating animals is wrong. Like, here's all of these, like, there's no black or white about it. And like, you can pick and choose the things that you're passionate about only because it's packaged up that way.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm not like, I don't want to make a dig at like the intellectual weight of some of the more straightforward black and white political songs by those bands, but you definitely needed that. It was like that's the only place that it existed. I mean, I lived in Scranton. There was no meeting of, there was no like I wasn't in college yet. I was in high school. I wasn't really exposed to alternative political ideas. It was just straight working class Democrats, or Republicans. It was just like,
yeah, it's just right. And the subculture that you got injected into, it's like that's where you're getting your worldview is opened up, and not just like the 10 blocks that surround you.
Oh, totally. And I think that's a weird thing for your self-esteem as well, because you feel like even though it may not be a wholesome thing, but you feel like you've got one up on everybody because you found something that is no one else has. It's like you're you're in on the inside joke. It's like, or not inside joke, but like you're in on the club because you are exposed to the righteous things and everybody else is wrong.
Right? Everyone else is in the dark, man. You saw the light.
Exactly. Yeah, dude. Everybody needs to fucking wake up, man.
Totally. You're just a bunch of sheeple.
Yeah, just a whole bunch of sheeple.
And so I'm going to presume that the Bob and the Saggets, like you said, was your first touring experience and playing outside of your local scene. Did you immediately take to the touring experience, or was that something that you kind of had to learn to like over time?
I loved it immediately. We were in high school, so we didn't do much overnight touring. We kind of just might stay at somebody's house outside of Philly or somewhere in upstate New York or something, and then come back the next day. But yeah, I loved it. Just the idea that we were out on our own doing whatever we wanted. I mean, we were really stupid about it. We played this thing called the Connecticut Ska Festival or something like that. Yeah, I don't remember what it was called. There was one that was called the Big Orange, maybe, which was pretty cool, but this wasn't it. This was a different one. And we had, one of the guys in the band was dating this. So we were 18 or 19. He was dating like a 30-year-old woman. So it was really funny. She would just buy his beer and we'd go get wasted at her house all the time while he's like teenagers.
Totally.
I guess it's kind of a little bit weird in retrospect, but at the time it made total sense. But she got us a keg. We were like, yeah, we're going to go to this festival. We're going to bring a keg with us. It'll be awesome. So we took it and we stuck it in between the passenger and driver's seat and put a jacket over it. And then just like we're drinking the whole ride up. And we get there and it's like not the vibe at all. It was like a helped put on by some of the band's parents. So there was a lot of like families there. It was not the
party vibe.
Right. Yeah, it was not a party vibe at all. But yeah, we continued to drink all day and then drove all the way home, which was very, very stupid.
Right.
But just like cutting across medians and all kinds of ridiculous shit like that. But that, just that wild, unhinged kind of exploration was definitely an immediate draw. I was so excited about that.
Right. The feeling that anything can happen.
Yeah, anything can happen. And you learn, there's that one saying, it's like, travel 1,000 miles is better than reading 100 books or whatever, which I don't necessarily agree with, but I do think that you can go and when you see and experience other people, even in the United States, the different subtle cultural differences between, the nomenclature, like people call things different things in different regions. It's all of it's really interesting and eye-opening, and I think you start to put together and realize what everybody has in common, and then that kind of, gives you a better perspective on humanity, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And so like you mentioned, you didn't have any aspirations as far as education was concerned in regards to going, like, did you actually go to college at all? Or was that something that you just were trying to do to placate your parents for a little bit?
Yeah, it was a combination of the two. I really wanted, I always loved learning. I did really well in school, and it had always come relatively easy in comparison to seem like what some of my friends had to go through in school. But when it came time to go to college, I was just wanted to tour. I didn't want to do anything else. So going to college was kind of like, in my mind, it was kind of a waste of time. And I was going through I had some mental, I guess you'd call them mental health issues at that time. And just kind of wasn't on track to learn. I couldn't pick a major. Well, I picked like 4 different majors in like 2 years. Just kept bouncing around and eventually got away from it. I went to Penn State, one of the satellite campuses in Scranton for 2 semesters, and then went to Community College of Philadelphia when I first moved to Philadelphia, and then dropped out. But I went from physics to business to English, and I was just kind of going to school to please other people.
Right,
and
right.
Cost money, yeah.
Right, totally. You're like, and I'm just spending a lot of some of my money, some of my parents' money, and this is what I'm doing right now.
Yeah.
When you mentioned the mental health issues, like what were you? Was it depression? Was it anxiety? I mean, I know those are two that are intertwined with one another.
Oh, totally, yeah. So it was definitely a depression, anxiety, a sense of lostlessness and directionlessness.
Mm-hmm.
That just kind of culminated over a period of time and had a bit of a nervous breakdown when I was 20. And I spent some time in the hospital for a couple days. And then actually the dudes came to pick me up in the van, which was pretty great. But yeah, it was, it just kind of went on for a long time and then culminated in just like, I don't know, losing my shit.
Mm-hmm.
And I was diagnosed with adult ADHD. And I think that was also led to it because they just threw a bunch of speed at me, so I immediately just started raging on that. That's still my favorite drug. I got to take it easy when somebody has to around me.
Yeah, you're like, I know, I really like that. I need to see for that.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I could keep some. I got some on hand. Like if emergency's sake, it can't be dry. But
right. Right. If you're,
it's definitely one of those. Yeah, it's definitely one of those drugs where if a doctor was like, hey, I think that you can live a more fulfilling life if I prescribe this to you, I'd be like, no way. I'm not going through that shit again.
Right.
But, so there was that. And, people have different feelings about the mental health industry. I certainly shy away from a lot of the things. I think some of the ways that people are treated and some of our preconceived notions about it are total bullshit. Not to downplay anybody who has serious mental health issues, but a lot of people, I think, seek something that they used to get from church in mental health world.
Mm-hmm.
And they just, took it as more of a spiritual thing. That's a whole other world. But yeah, I don't necessarily know if I agree with that diagnosis of the adult ADHD at the time. I think they kind of just threw that at me. I mean, how could you talk to somebody for 15 minutes and then diagnose them and come up with a treatment plan that involves, narcotics? It's just pretty crazy. But yeah, that stuff kind of spiraled out of control and everything went nuts and literally. And then that was a big wake up to kind of start to get a life together. And we got plans to take the band more seriously and move to Philadelphia not long after that.
Okay. Yeah. I was going to say, so you were able to, rebound, for lack of a better term, and put all of your mental energy towards the fact that, hey, this band, is going. We just need to take it more seriously.
Yeah, definitely. And I've got to say that my family were so incredibly supportive and always have been in my life. So, the fact that I was able to go home to a bunch of people who helped take care of me was not something that a lot of people have. So it was really, that was the big thing. And they kind of put it together. Like, you can do this, but you can't do it. There's only so many times you can play wherever in Scranton, and there's a whole music scene going on down in Philadelphia, and a whole, there's a million bands, so you got to do something, and it kind of just went.
Leftovers, or the DMV,
number 97,
or house cleaning, or
Chumba Casino always brings the fun. Play over 100 different games online for free from anywhere. You could redeem some serious prizes. ChumbaCasino.com. Live the Chumba life. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+ terms and conditions apply. See website for details.
I'm Lance Bass, and you may know me from a little band called NSYNC. What you may not know is that when I was 23, I traveled to Moscow to train to become the youngest person to go to space. And when I was there, as you can imagine, I heard some pretty wild stories. But there was this one that really stuck with me. About a Soviet astronaut who found himself stuck in space with no country to bring him down. It's 1991, and that man, Sergei Krikalev, is floating in orbit when he gets a message that down on Earth, his beloved country, the Soviet Union, is falling apart. And now he's left defending the Union's last outpost. This is the crazy story of the 313 days he spent in space. 313 days that changed the world. Listen to The Last Soviet on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
During the summer of 2020, some Americans suspected that the FBI had secretly infiltrated the racial justice demonstrations. And you know what? They were right. I'm Trevor Aronson, and I'm hosting a new podcast series. Alphabet Boys.
As the FBI, sometimes you gotta grab the little guy to go after the big guy.
Each season will take you inside an undercover investigation. In the first season of Alphabet Boys, we're revealing how the FBI spied on protesters in Denver. At the center of this story is a raspy-voiced, cigar-smoking man who drives a silver hearse.
And inside this hearse was like a lot of guns.
He's a shark, and not in the good badass way. He's a nasty shark.
He was just waiting for me to set the date, the time, and then for sure he was trying to get it to happen.
Listen to Alphabet Boys on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Hello, excuse the interruption, but I have to tell you about this amazing service from a company called HelloFresh. So you like meals, right? You like to eat food. Then this service is exactly for you, because what they do is they send healthy, amazing ingredients right to your doorstep. And you are able to cook meals in 35 minutes or less, and it's amazing. I've used the service. It's super, super great. So say you're super busy, which most of us are, or you have a large family, or you just want to learn how to cook better and more often. HelloFresh will provide all of these things for you with really, really healthy ingredients, and they can come to you 3, 4, 5 times a week. They offer a classic box, a veggie box, a family box. It's unbelievable. And it makes cooking fun and easy. So each week, they create new delicious recipes with step-by-step instructions designed to take around 30 minutes from everyone from the most experienced chef to a person like myself who barely has any idea of how to cut vegetables. But they source the freshest ingredients and they measure to the exact quantities so there's no food waste. And they employ 2 full-time registered dietitians on staff who review each recipe to ensure it's nutritionally balanced. And all of this is delivered right to your doorstep in a very easy box to open, to understand, to see all of your food and be like, wow, this is great. So I've tried this. The veggie box is unbelievable. I've made a shepherd's pie before, and like something that I never would have ever made my entire life. I did it and I accomplished it, and my family enjoyed it. And so for $35 off your first week of deliveries, visit HelloFresh.com and enter WORDS, 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 like, 100 words or less, the podcast name. Please do that, and you will get $35 off when you subscribe. So basically, like I said, it's like me taking you out to dinner. So just let me do that. HelloFresh.com and enter the code WORDS when you subscribe. So please check it out. You'll enjoy it, and thank you later for that. All right. Back to my conversation with Tom from the Menzingers. Something I find interesting about, because so many people started to pay attention to, in the late, aughts, whatever, late 2000s, whatever you want to call them. Yeah. So many people started to pay attention to, the Wilkes Barre scene as far as, Title Fight, Tiger's Jaw, a lot of those bands that started to exist. And you guys were, mentioned, but usually kind of on the outskirts of that, even though you played many shows with them, there's some of your closer friends from that perspective. Was it weird watching something that you, I presume, felt so attached to because you were playing shows and existing in the scene, and I'm not attacking it from the angle of like, oh, you guys were jealous that you're on the outside, but like, was it strange for you to kind of watch that scene all of a sudden get really, I guess, lifted up?
Oh, of course, yeah, it was super wild. It was very exciting for everybody. We played shows with Title Fight years ago when they were very young. I suppose we were really young as well. But like Tiger's Jaw, that brother was the original drummer. Greg played guitar in the band for a little bit. Like everybody's so interconnected from all those bands. But when that first started to come up, because it was kind of connected in our minds to the hardcore scene, which was something that we weren't that familiar with and weren't that involved in. I think it had to do with the fact that in Scranton, hardcore kids and quote unquote punk kids or whatever didn't get along that well, and there was like a lot of fights and shit, and we just kind of shied away from that whole Wilkes-Barre Posse Numbers Fest kind of scene. But when Title Fight started to explode, it was like, that was so exciting. We were like, man, this is awesome. All these bands from the area are getting so much, recognition. And I think that we had moved to Philadelphia at that point. So it was really awesome to see when they came through, play those massive shows and that. And then we did, I actually have the thing in front of me. In 2011, we ended up going on tour with Title Fight and Touche Amore and another band from Wilkes-Barre called Dead End Path. And that was like a we got to see it all across the entire country firsthand, and it was just so mind blowing.
Yeah, no, true. Yeah, that's right. I remember that tour. That was definitely a, with the exception of Touche, it was like a very, Pennsylvania centric tour.
Oh yeah, and half the kids, like Title Fight, were always notorious for piling a million kids in their van. They had there was just like 4 kids from Wilkes-Barre that. Like, well, what do you do on the tour? And then just like do whatever, kind of just hanging out.
Totally.
So yeah, it was this very Pennsylvania tour.
That's funny. Yeah, I always love those tours where you have, you have your person doing merch, and maybe if you have a person doing, quote unquote tech work, but then there always usually is that one person that's just like, oh yeah, they're the vibe lifter, they're the mood enhancer, where it's like,
yeah, they're the beer tech is what we always call them. So
dude, that's a good one. I like that one.
Yeah.
And it's so funny because you see that across bands that have that sense of longevity, where they're able to have 1 to 2 auxiliary people that basically help the band stay in a positive emotional state.
Yeah, I mean, we have some of the best. Our best friends are people that tour with us in our crew. Our front house guy Dave, who now has a visa, so this is awesome. He can come to the States and tour with us whenever he wants. He's from England, and our tour manager Scott, and our merch guy Jesus. All those guys are just become such good friends, and half the reason that we like to have them come with us is because they do that. They keep the mood and they keep everybody going, and oftentimes like a big touring group of people, they say an army marches down its stomach, but it also definitely morale needs to be kept up, and that's awesome when you have positive people there.
Yeah.
And some people come along and they just do that, It's like friends that'll be like, hey, I'm going to ride with you guys for a couple days, and we'll say yes immediately because they're just that great to be around.
Totally, yeah, because all the attention can be focused on that person, because then you don't need to pay attention to each other, because that's all you've been doing for the last 100 plus shows or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. The last 10 years. Yeah.
Totally.
Which I think we lucked out as in a band, because we're all still really good friends. And every time we come home from tour, a day or two goes by, and then we're just like, hey, what are you doing tonight? And then you just start hanging out again, even though we're not on tour, because that's who we hang out with when we get home. It's kind of funny.
Yeah, that is funny. So in the earlier years of getting the Menzingers started, as far as playing out and getting people to your shows and stuff like that, when did you feel like you actually had some momentum, even if it's something super super small and tiny? You could easily point to the fact like, oh, we had momentum once we signed Epitaph, and it's like, that's obvious. But when did you feel personally like, hey, I think that people are identifying with this thing that we're doing?
I guess it had to have been when people started showing up to shows that we played at different basement venues and stuff in Philly that we didn't know that were singing along. So like an entire basement full of people would be breaking everything and singing along and just being complete nuts, and we didn't know who they were. So it was kind of like, oh man, people are, they're either listening to the CDs that we had at the last show, or they are listening online or whatever. So I think that was when we first realized how passionate someone that we didn't know was getting about it. And we were like, oh man, if we can elicit this kind of response from somebody, maybe we're doing something right here.
Sure. Did you, were you just working like random jobs that allowed you to tour as you guys were, trying to build up your touring experience?
Oh yeah, I've had every job, every job you can think of, except I've never worked in an office, and I've never worked retail. I don't think I was ever, back in the super punk days, clean enough to work a retail job. I don't think anybody would want me touching their t-shirts in any capacity.
Right.
But I worked in the service industry and construction, and yeah, when I'm at that time, I was either washing dishes at a place called the Warsaw, or cooking, or working for a bar in West Philly called the Blarney Stone, where we did every job. So I delivered food on bicycle, cooked, bar back, did security, like every job you can think of in that place, which was great because they gave you a shift beer at the end of the shift, and it was actually a pitcher. It was great.
That's a shift beer.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah, shift beer, man. They just filled up a pitcher with Yangling, gave it to you.
You're like, good night of work.
Yeah, right. That the worst job that we had, Joe and I had the job together, was selling metal roofing and home improvement projects door to door. So we'd wear like a polo shirt and nice pants. And this is like at the very, the explosion of the housing bubble. Nobody had any money to get their house fixed. But Joe and I walk around and just knock on the door and be like, hey, we're running a special on gutters this week. And then that job was just humiliating. Hated that job.
That does not sound pleasant at all.
No.
I wanted to pull on one thread that you mentioned a little bit earlier, because I do think there is an interesting dichotomy in the way that, you know, the punk and hardcore scene kind of played with one another. You know, there were scenes that, you know, both bands could, when I say both bands, I'm, you know, stereotypically speaking about a hardcore and punk band, you know, they could play together and, you know, there's no issues whatsoever. But then there are certain, you know, pockets of the country where it's like there's such a thick dividing line, not intentionally, but just kind of like, oh yeah, we're, you know, whatever, youth crew hardcore, and like, you know, they're like, you know, total, you know, gutter / street punks or whatever. So like, of course we wouldn't play together. But then there was, you know, nuance, especially in the scene of, you know, Wilkes Barre, where it was like, yeah, there's a lot of that youth crew stuff happening, and, you know, maybe there wasn't room for a lot of, you know, punkish type bands. But did you, like, when you said you didn't identify it, did you feel like, I guess, intentionally ostracized, or was it just like, oh, that's not our scene, so we're not even going to kind of like go for those shows?
I think a combination of the both. We kind of, the Scranton scene was centered around a couple venues. There was one that was called Cafe del Sol, which is the first one we started going to, and that was a total 77 punk, you know, like a street punk kind of scene, and that's what we were in. And we weren't really exposed to that much hardcore. Like, I guess the only, I get Minor Threat and stuff would be the only thing that like the crossover kind of shit. It's so funny that this is so pigeonholed, because it's all, you know, you're making aggressive music from a certain demographic about certain things. It's all the same essentially. It's just kind of like a weird divide, like the youth crew stuff and all that. But yeah, they used to come and people would just fight. So they'd be like, oh well, those kids from Wilkes-Barre here, they're gonna fight in the parking lot. Let's go watch, you know. And it was just like almost like a 1950s gang movie, you know, just whatever divide. And then it always someone would fight over a relationship or get beat up, and some of our friends got beat up by some of the Wilkes-Barre people, so we just kind of thought, you know, they didn't want us around, or we weren't welcome, or, you know.
Yeah, steer clear from it.
Yeah, get away from it. And they're all bigger, and they're all tougher, and they're all straight edge, so they're like in better shape, you know, deal with that, man.
No, totally. The scene that I come from is definitely, you know, more aligned with the hardcore scene. I myself am straight edge, but we always had a very, you know, fun spirited game of dodgeball, not at shows, but like, you know, maybe on like a Sunday afternoon, we had straight edge versus drunks, as far as and it was always hilarious, because it's like people on both sides took it so goddamn seriously, because it was like, oh dude, if straight edge wins, like of course we win, because, you know, we're sober and they're, you know, drunks, and they, you know, had drank too much the night before or whatever. And then if you know, then if the drunks win, they're just like, of course you losers, like we know how to have fun, so we're losing. But it's just, yeah.
Oh, that's great, man.
Yeah, that's a fun spirit, not fighting at shows, you know.
Oh yeah, totally.
Different story.
There was one thing that kind of united a bunch of the people, and that was these fucking Nazis started showing up when we were like, what year was that? It was probably like 2007, maybe. This skinhead group called the Keystone State Skinheads from like the middle of Pennsylvania in the woods somewhere, just started showing up in Wilkes-Barre, and nobody liked them, so it was good. It was kind of like a something that everybody can really relate to and back, in the sense that nobody wanted them around.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, that is good. Like when you are able to, you know, target a common enemy, when you're just like, wait a minute, like our way of life is being threatened by these people who neither of us agree with, so they need to be pushed out. So let's work together.
Yeah, totally.
It's like it's like the Avengers, right?
yeah, totally. But yeah, there's that. And also, you know, I probably am, in retrospect, kind of romanticizing or at least dramatizing the whole divide. I mean, everybody hung out with everybody. I hung out with some of the hardcore kids in Scranton that like introduced me to Gorilla Biscuits and, you know, be straight edge, and you know, it's fun to hang out with them. It doesn't, you know, have to get fucked up every day.
Yeah. Yeah. So. Well, no, I mean, that's good that you're able to, not everything is, like you said, is this dividing line. It's like, yeah, they're, you know, the one or two bad apples ruin it for the whole bunch, where it's like these people that are, you know, taking up a crusade against who shouldn't be coming to shows. And it's like, yeah, not everybody feels that way.
So I think they saw SLC Punk too many times and kind of like, saw the whole tribalism aspect that they have in that movie, just took that seriously and kind of was like, well, that's the way it is, man.
Yep, totally. And it's so funny too, because like the, we talk about this, existing in a scene, 7 to 8 years ago, if not a little bit longer. And it's funny because I think, most people can survey the landscape right now. And, there isn't that much divisiveness at shows, it's like people listen to everything now. People can listen to, the Menzingers and Katy Perry and no one's batting an eye.
Oh yeah, no, one bit. I think that could be part of the togetherness of social media. Like you can kind of, the way that people interact with each other is, changed a whole lot, and it's not so tribalistic. I think some of those, I'm sure that those adolescent insecurities will always exist, but I think a lot of the reasons that people attach themselves to different groups that identified by, bands or clothing or whatever back then did it because you kind of, you had to choose a side. You didn't really have a way of connecting to or creating a strong social bond, especially because everybody's already in an outcast-ish kind of vibe because they got into punk rock in the first place, I guess. But I think a lot of that's disappeared, and a lot of people are kind of just like, do whatever.
Right. So, no matter what, you can find your crew, whatever that means.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. It can be like, I've got some friends that are into the weirdest shit randomly. They'll be like, yeah, I'm on this, this internet subreddit for one of them recently. Loves mechanical keyboards. And I was like, what do you mean mechanical keyboard? You know how the old school keyboards that click when you type them? There's a whole subgenre of people that are just really into that. And I was like, wow, man, you can find friends from wherever. He was going to meet up with them at a bar. I was like, all right, that's
totally
all right. Cool. That's awesome. Bringing people together from all kinds of walks of life.
I know. To that point, I find it so interesting when many people that exist in the world, don't have things that they're extremely passionate about. And I find that so, especially in today's culture, where it's like, you mentioned something as niche as mechanical keyboards, and it's like, it's like you can't find anything you care about, and people are like, well, yeah, I like books, and it's like, well, that's cool, but like, what books? You're like, oh, like all of them. It's like, what? I don't even know where to begin. Like, pick something, pick something you care about.
Just have a little passion, can't be lukewarm.
Yeah, totally.
Either, I guess that justifies it. Either hate something a lot or like it.
Very good.
At least hopefully like it. Yeah.
Totally. A few last things I want to hit on before I let you go was, you mentioned earlier in regards to, people casting dispersions on you guys, for selling out in regards to, your record sounding more polished as you grow older and, you actually become good at your instruments. I definitely remember the time when, it was announced that you guys were signing to Epitaph. And at that time, there was a lot of mixed feelings about what Epitaph was in regards to like, okay, you have the bands that, kind of maintain the sort of ethos and aesthetic of what Epitaph has always stood for. And then you had other bands that were, clearly part of a different era of Epitaph, and it was all kind of commingling with one another. I'm sure there was a lot of very deliberate discussions on your guys' end whether or not this was a good move for you guys, or did you generally just like, well, we don't care, like this is the right move for us?
As like kind of, I guess, not really scummy it sounds, but it's totally true. So to say, we spent more time talking about how it would be perceived than we did caring about it, because Epitaph was a dream label for us. All those bands, the Punkaramas were what introduced me to so many bands, and we got to go out there and meet Brett Gurewitz, and it was pretty crazy. We just hung out all day and smoked cigars, and he told us all these crazy old stories from all these like awesome war stories from the beginnings of Epitaph, and it was incredible. We were sold immediately. We were like, oh yeah, fuck yeah, we're gonna sign Epitaph. But we were worried about how it'd be perceived because they got some garbage bands, there was like some bands on there that were just awful.
Right.
And so we, and it wasn't much of a discussion. It was kind of like, well, is everybody going to call us sellouts? And then, kind of 10 minutes later, everybody's like, well, who cares what anybody says about us? We're definitely going to do it. And I'm really glad we did do it. And sometimes is in the music industry, conversations do come up where we're like, well, how do we feel about this? Maybe recently we were offered a huge amount of money to play a show that we knew that the person putting the show on wasn't going to make that money back. I don't know if they were being naive or like what it was. And we were like, well, we can't just like, is it wrong to take the money and run? What's the deal? Like, well, how do we feel about this? And how's it going to be for our future? We ended up not going for it, but it was a lengthy discussion because like if we do this for a living, and I think that if anybody for the earliest and most simple levels of the sellout argument where people are like, oh, I can't believe they do that. It's like, well, you go to work every day, and if you think that your boss doesn't benefit economically from paying you that amount, then you're wrong. Like, you're working for somebody else's dream. Not all the time, but in an economic sense, it's kind of like, well, how are you going to call somebody a sellout when you work at, like, I don't know, a defense contractor or like a fast food restaurant or something. But yeah, it's like it's difficult to make some of those decisions, and I don't know. It's like there's no set blueprint that we've been able to follow, or no set written mission statement that we could default every moral decision to. It's pretty wild.
Yeah, it's very it's weirdly instinctual. It's one of those things where it's like this is a horrible analogy, and I apologize for it in advance. But it's like pornography. You can look, like, when you see it, like, it's pornography. Like, there's no differentiating it. So it's like that internal instinct that a band kind of develops. It's like like you said, you needed one day to hang out with Brett and be like, yo, this is the right move. And no one else is going to have that experience. So all they're going to do is pile on whatever their own personal experiences are for it. And you guys can't, you can't control that. Like, that's not your...
Yeah, exactly. I think that was a great analogy. That's one of my favorite. I think it was one of the Supreme Court justices on one of the obscenity cases. That was what was in his decision. He said, I don't know. Pornography is. That's what totally. I know. See it. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. Well,
I thought that was really funny.
That's good. I'm glad you take it and use it.
Yeah, definitely.
If there's two morals to this conversation, start calling the people that come to your shows zinger heads, and
yeah. Like that.
Yeah.
That's a little close. I don't know, man. It's getting close to the racial epithet from the Vietnam War, I'm feeling zinger heads. That's a little...
That's true. That's probably not very racially sensitive, and I apologize. I was not coming at it from a place of anywhere but being absolutely ridiculous with your band name.
Hell yeah.
And so, were there any other, labels that approached you guys in regards to, working together, and that you guys were just like, oh, like, I mean, because, there's always that hunger from a major label perspective for bands that are left of center, that are sort of melodic and, can maybe be the quote unquote next Nirvana or whatever. Did you guys ever have any, interesting discussions or conversations with people in that realm?
I wish I had a great story about getting taken out for drinks by somebody from a major label, and we were just like, yeah, we took their money, fuck them, but I don't. There was no major labels at the time that wanted to, put out a record or anything. Some of the other bigger independent ones had talked to us and thought that it could be a good idea. But we lucked out. This guy John, who works at Epitaph, who does publishing for them, his desk was behind Brett's desk. They have like I don't even know how you would call it. It's set up. There's like open desks kind of platform at Epitaph. There's like a couple different sections, and then there'll be a couple rows of desks. And the top one is where like Brett sits and John sat, and Brett's assistant Sue and a bunch of the other people. And he sat behind Brett and would play our record all the time. So he was just like hearing it. And one day, I guess, eventually he was like, "Who are those guys? Let's check them out." And then, and we actually spoke about Tim before, Tim, our manager, and they had a pre-existing relationship with Epitaph, so it kind of like opened the door and, made it a lot easier for us to sign to them.
Yeah, no, that's really, really cool.
Yeah.
And so now, now that you're like you mentioned earlier, your parents have accepted the idea that you are a touring musician. This is actually a sustainable, albeit meager, but sustainable way of living your life. When did you feel like they were, or maybe this is still something forthcoming, but like that they were, proud of you, that they like looked at what you were doing with some sort of like, oh wow, like Tom did this thing, like whether it was like, going to a show at Union Transfer or whatever, like was there a moment that you realized like, oh, my parents actually back what I'm doing?
I think, they always backed it in the sense that they knew that that's what I wanted to do, so they wouldn't be like, this is stupid. They were not spiteful. They were not immature in any facet. They were always just looking out for what they thought my best interests were, and I totally get that, and that's great. If the moment would probably be when I started to tour and be like, yeah, well, where are you this week? I'm like, oh, I'm in California. And they're like, what? Oh, wow, that's great. When that started to become apparent that I could travel substantially and not hit them up every 6 months and be like, hey, can I borrow like $200? I'm really short this month,
Right.
Which I didn't do too much of, but when I was when we first moved to Philadelphia, definitely do that all the time. But yeah, I think that they, really started to get proud when they could see how serious I was and how much work they realized how much work we were putting in. I think they thought that the idea was that we could play music so that we could slack off, when in reality it's so much work. So it's like
honestly, that's a very interesting point, because I do think that most people's notion of a band exists in the rock star world of buses and plane flights and all that stuff, and once parents get a peek behind the curtain of like, oh, like you're folding your shirts to like pack up for tour, like in regards to the merchandise, and it's like, you want me to help with that? Like, okay, I guess this is different than what I guess being in a band is.
Yeah, or like, what do you mean you're doing taxes and trying to figure out different approaches to minimize your expenses and practice for several hours a day. All that. Yeah, they definitely don't get that. Some people though, they really just want you to live that so bad that you kind of just let them think you do. Especially a lot of like middle-aged trade worker guys, like mechanics and stuff, where they will run into and be like, oh, dude, so you guys, there's got to be girls everywhere. It's got to be so awesome. And we're just like, yeah, man, it's real cool. Well, they know we're just kind of, sitting in a hotel room watching like Pawn Stars, and then, driving for 8 hours and playing, in Amarillo, Texas, or whatever.
Right. Yeah, you're like real glamorous. Like we got to order Domino's tonight, which is probably the same things as you guys are doing.
Yeah, exactly. But you always got to let them think it, so that they it just makes their life easier to live. That's what they want to do.
That just occurred to me, because I'm sure you guys have a standard answer for when people ask you your band name in those certain instances where whatever, you're getting an oil change or you're at Denny's or whatever, and they're like, oh, you're a band. Do you guys have a fun fake band name that you go to, or you?
Oh my God, our tour manager Scott, without fail, every single time that we're somewhere, tells people we are shit. It's usually a different band that's just becoming popular in the alternative world. Like I think he was telling people 21 Pilots a couple of years ago. Just shit like that. Always. Oh, one time though, when we were crossing the Canadian border, they were convinced that our friend Nick, who comes out and texts with us sometimes, was the guy from the Black Keys, and they took a picture with him and everything. It was it's really funny. So definitely just kind of make stuff up unless people seem genuinely interested.
Right.
Also, we don't have the easiest to pronounce or sense making band name, so it's kind of like pain in the ass to say our actual band name. So it's like
totally
just fuck with it.
It's like the science of it is like you have to name a band that clearly isn't on TV. Like you could joke around where it's like, oh yeah, Metallica, and it's like everybody knows what Metallica looks like. So
of course,
you have to find that next level down where it's just like you're like, oh, Linkin Park, like we probably can't say that because some people may know that they have like a DJ, and like they'll probably be like, oh, take out your tables or something.
Yeah, totally. Or they'll be that might be like, oh, my daughter loves you guys, so that'll be like, can you wait here, we're just gonna come over or something like that. So you got to pick a band that they'll look up and be like, wow, that's random.
Yeah, totally.
I can't believe I met that band, and then
right,
it's pretty funny.
And so the last thing I want to hit on was the kind of what we were talking about earlier in regards to how people that we kind of envy the idea that people can kind of just like listen to music for music's sake and have no context for music scenes or whatever, but because you've existed in different spheres of the independent music scene, from ska, punk, hardcore, everything that you've kind of immersed yourself with, how, beyond the fact that you play in a band and you're engaged in the independent scene, like how do you kind of actively stay engaged to the fact that you still care about independent music?
So my girlfriend actually is an editor of she's one of the editors of a Philadelphia music magazine. So I constantly get exposed to all other genres and other people in the area, and we'll go to shows and check out all this kind of weird stuff. Like I've been to hip hop shows and indie shows and things like that. And it's a lot more fun and eye-opening to kind of be and exist in those other realms. Yeah, it's definitely a great way to stay engaged. And there's also, I guess, at this point, the four of us kind of started listening to maybe different things, and we always used to just listen to the same shit because we put it on the van, on in the van. But we spent so much time off of tour this last 2 years that we kind of, we show each other new bands and new music and kind of drift in those places. And yeah, it's been probably most interesting though. I would want to say is that I'm starting to go back and listen to a lot of the music that I didn't listen to because I'd pigeonholed it as something else. There's so many decades of recorded music out now, in the things like Spotify. It's not difficult to kind of find them. In fact, you have the opposite problem. There's too much to look at. You can't decide what to listen to. But I think that going back and seeing some of the older bands has been a way to kind of completely open up my eyes to different music.
Yeah, I'm going to put you on the spot because I find it interesting of the, what did you have, preconceived notions towards that you ended up actually really enjoying?
Oh man, there's gotta be something that I thought of that I didn't like. Oh, bands like In Excess, some of those 80s bands. I just kind of thought they were goofy, whatever, but they've got some great tunes, man. In Excess has a song called Don't Change that I heard for the first time recently. It is so good. Such a jam.
Dude, yeah, and NXS was actually my first concert experience before Michael Hutchence obviously killed himself. So yeah, that was like 1987 or 88, and I just remember, like, I'm not a dancing sort of guy, even when I was younger, but I just remember, like, my dad saying, like, all you were doing was just standing in the aisle dancing, and it was one of those things where it's like there's no way that I can ever look at NXS and be not like, they're unbelievable. Anybody that thinks otherwise, it's like, dude, you haven't actually listened to the record. Like, Kick is
totally.
Kick is unbelievable.
Oh, so good. Yeah, I totally. That's I completely thought that's how that was. You have these like little preconceived notions about bands just by, I don't know, the type of people that wear their T-shirt. You just be like, I'm not gonna listen to that fucking band. That guy sucks.
Dude, for sure.
Yeah. Then you find yourself listening, and it's like, wow, this is awesome.
Right. I love that because it definitely is really steep within independent music culture because people are so precious about the bands that they like, and so they feel such a sense of ownership over them. So they feel that, by default, if someone who they consider, quote unquote lame is wearing something, they're like, oh, dude, I'll probably hate that. And it's like, yeah, I was very much the same way with like so much indie rock stuff where I'm like, oh, dude, Neutral Milk Hotel, like probably dog shit. And then like,
oh my God, that band specifically, I was like, when I maybe heard one song when I was younger, but all of my friends who the people I knew who loved that band religiously were just such douchebags. I put it off forever checking them out. And it's one of my favorite records of all time now. It's like, it's like, God damn it.
I know. But fortunately, this day and age, like, you're really never late to the game. You'll just be like, well, I just really like that record now. And then, hopefully they do some reunion shows and like, oh, lo and behold.
Lo and behold, it's going to, yeah, there it is.
Yeah. Exactly. Well, Tom, I really appreciate you hanging out with with me over Skype. And I hope this was painless for you.
That was fantastic. Thanks so much for having me.
All right. That was Tom, huh? Pretty cool. And like I said, his band is great, so you should get on board and be listening to his entire band's catalog, and especially his new record, After the Party, out on Epitaph Records, right? That's my promotional pitch right there. But thank you very much for his manager, Tim, who's an old friend of mine and who helped hook this up, and then Tom for being so accommodating in our scheduling. So, thank you very much for all of those people involved in this. And next week is a in-person conversation that I had with a friend who, I was going to say old friend, but he's not old in the sense of he's old age-wise. But he's not old as far as I've known him for a long time. But we became pretty quick friends just via mutual friends. And once we started to get to know each other, it was like, oh, man, we should have been friends for a lot longer period of time. Ian Miller, he plays in a band called Kowloon Walled City, also plays in a band called Less Art with a ton of other awesome people like Riley from Thrice and Mike Minnick from Curl Up and Die, both previous guests of the show. And so we had a nice conversation at his house, and we talked about a ton of cool stuff. So that's what's happening next week. And that's all I got. So please be safe, everybody.
You've been listening to the Jabberjaw Podcast Network, jabberjawmedia.com. Shh.
Leftovers. Or the DMV.
Number 97.
Or house cleaning. Or
Chumba Casino always brings the fun. Play over 100 different games online for free from anywhere. You could redeem some serious prizes. ChumbaCasino.com. Live the Chumba life. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+ terms and conditions apply. See website for details.
I'm Jason Alexander.
And I'm Peter Tobin.
And we know you've been pining for a brand new podcast hosted by a beloved television icon.
And a largely unknown talk radio host.
Yeah. I wrote that. Pine no more, because we're the hosts of Really No Really, the funny, informative show that seeks the answers to things that make us say, really?
You'll laugh, you'll learn.
And we'll get paid. That's Really No Really with Jason Alexander and Peter Tilden on the iHeartRadio app, on Apple Podcasts, or where you get your podcasts.
And anybody who uses the word pining, let me know, because I don't think anybody's used that since the Middle Ages.
Very common word.
Alphabet Boys is a new podcast series that goes inside undercover investigations. In the first season, we're diving into an FBI investigation of the 2020 protests. It involves a cigar-smoking mystery man who drives a silver hearse.
And inside this hearse was like a lot of guns.
But are federal agents catching bad guys or creating them?
He was just waiting for me to set the date, the time, and then for sure he was trying to get it to happen.
Listen to Alphabet Boys on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.